Let's go over the Gemara that we did. So the Gemara had mentioned that Rabbi Yossi holds a special halacha that if a person carried on Yom Tov because of a mitzvah, the Yom Tov that fell on Shabbos, I should say, he carried on Sukkot that fell on Shabbos. He did it because of a mitzvah. So in that scenario, he's going to be exempt from a korban. Normally, you would be chayiv a korban. You made a mistake on in the laws of Shabbos. You carried. You'd have to bring a korban. This guy, he, for whatever reason, didn't know, forgot, and he's traveling, and seemingly the understanding is he's maybe going to his Rav to find out how to shake it. So he carried it. And the halacha is that he's going to be exempt from a korban, according to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi comes up with this unique law. Under normal circumstances, you would think he's chayev. Rabbi Yossi says no. It's a chidush, surprising, innovative law. He says he's exempt, and the reason being, it's called hoitzi birashus. He carried, but he was involved in a mitzvah, rishus of a mitzvah. He had permission to do this mitzvah, so he was somehow overwhelmed with thinking his obligation to do a mitzvah, and therefore it caused him to forget. Somehow that's a different type of forgetting. That type of forgetting is sort of we're going to forgive him for. If it was a different type of forgetting, we'd hold him to it and have to bring the korban. This type of overwhelming, he's worried about the mitzvah. Somehow, Rav Yossi finds a leniency here to exempt him from bringing a korban. The Gemara says that Abaye adds a qualification to this leniency, and he says that the whole heter of Rabbi Yossi, this whole leniency of Rabbi Yossi, is only if he is busy he's worried about fulfilling the mitzvah. He didn't fulfill the mitzvah yet, and therefore he's so overwhelmed with trying to fulfill the mitzvah. That's why he's exempt. But if he already fulfilled the mitzvah and he's still carried in the street, then we will not exempt him. Then he's going to be obligated in bringing a korban, a sacrifice. And the Gemara asks, every case when you carry, you already fulfilled the mitzvah, because every case where you carry the lulav in the street, once you lift up the lulav, you've already fulfilled the mitzvah, because we assume mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, mitzvahs don't need kavana. And if you lifted up your lulav, you already fulfilled the mitzvah. And if so, what is the case where Rabbi Yossi is going to exempt such a person? This guy carried it in the street. He already fulfilled the mitzvah. Abaye says, oh, you fulfilled the mitzvah. If you carried it in the street, you're obligated to bring a korban, chatas, a sin offering, because you made a mistake in sin. Rabbi Yossi says you're exempt. What case would Rabbi Yossi be talking about where Rabbi Yossi says you're exempt if you're only exempt if you did not fulfill the mitzvah yet? But how could you carry it without fulfilling the mitzvah if mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana? That's what the Gemara is bothered with. So Abaye says, well, there is a way. If you carried them upside down, then in such a case, if you carry the lulav upside down or the esrog, in such a case, you did not fulfill the mitzvah yet, but you did carry. So you carried in the street, and Rabbi Yossi says you're exempt, and Abaye says if you fulfilled the mitzvah already, you're not exempt. But here you didn't fulfill the mitzvah already, so Rabbi Yossi's law will kick in. Rabbi Yossi's law will take effect because you did not fulfill the mitzvah because you turned it over. You carried the lulav upside the esrog or the lulav upside down. Rava says you could say it's talking about that you carried it inside some other receptacle, or like a plate on a plate. And even though Rava says in a different earlier Gemara, Rava holds that even if you don't actually hold the lulav, you hold it through something else with a scarf, you fulfill the mitzvah. But that's if it's done in an honorable, dignified way. If it's not done in such a way, a derech bizayin, in a more of a disgraceful way, like carrying it in a plate, then you did not fulfill the mitzvah. If it's done al yedei davar acher, you're holding it through another, by means of another item. If you're holding it by means of something else, then you will not have fulfilled the mitzvah. Now, if that's the case, then what comes out is that there are ways Rabbi Yossi's law will take effect. You didn't fulfill the mitzvah yet. You carried in the street. You're gonna fulfill the mitzvah of I'm sorry, you've sinned with carrying in the street, but you don't have to bring a carbon. And that was really the conclusion, one of the two ways that it's possible of his law to take to apply. If you either carried it upside down, or you carried it through another item, by means of another item, and it was not in a dignified way, and therefore you did not fulfill the mitzvah of lulav, and therefore when you carried it with that overwhelming feeling of you need to do the mitzvah, and you forgot about Shabbos, and you carried it, and in that, Rabbi Yossi says you are exempt. Now, the Gemara mentions an extension of this law of Rabbi Yossi. What is the extension of the law of Rabbi Yossi? So Rav Huna talks about a case that Rabbi Yossi says regarding the law of an oilas ha'oif that got mixed with chatos ha'oif. Now, the oilas ha'oif and the chatos ha'oif normally are brought in different, are slaughtered at a different place. And it's not exactly the word slaughtering. I don't know if it's appropriate. They would do something called malika, where the kohen would stick his nail of his thumb into the back of the neck of the bird, and sever the windpipe, or the food pipe, and ultimately the animal would be killed in that manner. And that was called malika, and that was the way it was done, the way the slaughtering was done for these sacrifices. Now, the chatos ha'oif, the sin offering of a bird, was done on the southwestern corner. The oilas ha'oif, the burnt offering, not the sin offering, but the burnt offering, that was always done on the southeast corner. And oilas ha'oif was always done on the southeast. Now, what happens when they had too many sacrifices? If they had too many burnt offerings, so what they would do would be they would take the burnt offerings that should have been done on the southeast side of the mizbeach, of the altar, and they would go to the southwest corner. Now, when you go to the southwest corner, what happens is most of the animals, or the other animals there, are really the sin offering animals. And there's a mitzvah to eat the meat of the sin offering animal. There's a sin to eat the meat of the burnt offering animals. And here you're standing in the southwest corner, and you've got a burnt offering there, and a person could easily make a mistake and start eating the burnt offering. And that's what happened over here. Oilas ha'oif, that's found between the other birds. In other words, in the place where the sin offerings are. And again, it's in the southwest corner. That's where the sin offerings are. And you have an oila, a burnt offering there, because there's too many burnt offerings going on in the southeastern corner. So the over the extras are sort of pushed over to the southwestern corner, and now you got some burnt offerings, and they're sort of like mixed with the sin offerings. And the sin offerings are a mitzvah to eat, and a person might think, "Oh yeah, I better eat this because I have to, because it's a mitzvah." So what happened was someone thought that it's a sin offering, and really it was a burnt offering, and he ate it. So Rabbi Yossi says, you know what? You're exempt. So he takes the same law here about carrying your lulav on Shabbos. You're exempt from a sin offering. Here, all in the case of a burnt offering that you ate it, well, it was supposed to be burned to Hashem, and you ate it because it got mixed with the sin offerings. That's a mitzvah to eat those. And instead you ate a burnt offering. Why? Because you were so overwhelmed with this thinking, oy I better eat this. It's gonna, if I leave it over, it's gonna get nicer. It's gonna be left over. It won't be eaten, and we have to eat it. We have to eat it soon. And so you were overwhelmed thinking about a mitzvah. And so Rabbi Yossi there also says, you know what? You're exempt from what's called a korban me'ilah, from desecrating or benefiting from, I should say, benefiting from holy items. This korban oila, this burnt offering of a bird, of an oila, is a special offering to Hashem, and you benefit from it. Where it's not supposed to be eaten, and you went and ate from it. You benefited. It's called me'ilah. You were moil. You benefited from the holies, and because of that, you're supposed to bring a korban. Rabbi Yossi comes along and says, "No, that's when you didn't make a mistake based on thinking that you're doing a mitzvah. That's a regular mistake. But here you were overwhelmed with a mitzvah, thinking that you have to eat this because it's a chata, so you thought it's a sin offering, and it mentions by a sin offering that it's a mitzvah to eat it, and so on. And therefore, Rabbi Yossi says there also, you know what? You're exempt from the korban. Now, this is very connected to our Mishnah, because our Mishnah also has a case of Rabbi Yossi saying you're exempt. He's talking about another type of exemption from a sin offering, from a transgressing Shabbos, but it's the same idea. You're overwhelmed with a mitzvah. To the extent that the Gemara even asks, says, this is the same thing. Why are you telling me this? It's exactly the same law. I don't need Rabbi Yossi to even tell me. I would have passed in. I would assume this was the halacha anyway. Why does Rabbi Yossi even have to say it? And the Gemara asks, Hainu hach. Hainu hach. That's the wording of the Gemara. This is the same law. Why does Rabbi Yossi even have to say it? And why is Rav Huna mentioning it? Why is Rav Huna repeating it? Okay, maybe Rabbi Yossi said it. He said it together. But why is Rav Huna repeating it if this is the, we could learn it from the Mishnah? So the Gemara says, no, you wouldn't be able to learn it from the Mishnah, because in the Mishnah, it's a little different. The Mishnah, he actually fulfilled a mitzvah when he, in the case of the Mishnah, in the case that of our Mishnah, what happened? He was overwhelmed. He carried his lulav. Why? He was trying to do a mitzvah of shaking lulav. In the end, did he shake the lulav? Yes. He did shake the lulav. He carried his lulav. He did a sin, but he also ended up shaking it. He shook it properly. And therefore, because he was overwhelmed with a mitzvah, and he ultimately did a mitzvah, Rabbi Yossi says you're exempt. However, in this case, what happened? You were overwhelmed with a mitzvah. That's true. In this case, because you ate a korban oila because you thought it was a chatas and you thought it's a mitzvah to eat it. So you ate it because of a mitzvah, but Did you end up doing the mitzvah of the oila? No, you didn't do the mitzvah. You ended up sinning. It didn't ultimately lead to a mitzvah. The case of our Mishnah led to a mitzvah. You did carry it in the street, but it ultimately led to a mitzvah. And here, it didn't lead to a mitzvah. Here, your mistake was basically the end of it. You ate it, and you shouldn't have. So you might have thought that Rabbi Yossi will not exempt you in this case. In Kamash Malan, Rav Huna comes and lets us hear that he heard from Rabbi Yossi that even in this case, the same halacha would apply. And whether a mitzvah was done in the end or not, you were overwhelmed with a mitzvah, you're exempt from the carbon. So that's the Gemara's that is the Gemara's conclusion, and that Rav Huna lets us hear that this is also an extension of Rav Yossi's law that it says in our Mishnah. He extends it to this law as well. When you ate a carbon oila, a bird, oila, sacrifice, that you ate by mistake, because you should have burnt it. And you made a mistake. It was in the wrong place, and you were overwhelmed thinking that it's a mitzvah to eat it. You thought it was a sin offering because it was actually in the place where the sin offerings are. And, you made a mistake based on that, based on your thinking of your obligation of doing a mitzvah. That's what caused you to sin. You're exempt from a carbon me'ilah. Okay, now comes the next case. The Gemara asks a question, Mesvei. Mesvei is a contradiction. The Gemara says that we have a contradiction over it. The Rabbi Yossi wants to say you're exempt in the case where, even though you didn't do a mitzvah, you're exempt. That's what we just concluded. So comes along the Bnei Yeshiva, the student scholars, they ask a question. Meisvei. Rabbi Yossi Omer. We have a brisa. The brisa says that Rabbi Yossi says, we're going to do this inside. So let me tell you what we're on. We're on page 42a, and the word that we're starting with is Meisvei. And it's the first word on the line. And it's about, what should I say, about 12 lines from the top of the page. Maybe 15 lines, 14 lines from the top of the page. Meisvei. Rabbi Yossi, so 42a. Rabbi Yossi, Omer Rabbi Yossi says, and we bring a brisa where Rabbi Yossi says, Hashoichet es hatamid, she'enoi mevukar. If a person slaughters a carbon tamid, the daily sacrifice, it was not checked for mums. It was not checked. He didn't check it for for blemishes. And you're really supposed to check 4 days before it's slaughtered. You check for mums. And that is actually one of the reasons why we say slichos for 4 days, always before Rosh Hashanah. And we always start on a Saturday night. If you don't have 4 days in that week, we always push it off to the week before, and you get an extra week of slichas. And I'm not talking about the Sephardic people. They start slichas the whole month. But us Ashkenazim, we start slichas always 4 days before Rosh Hashanah. So if Rosh Hashanah is on a Thursday, we're all set. We could do Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We are 4 days of slichas. We're all set. If Rosh Hashanah is any earlier, then we end up starting slichas the week before. And why? Because we're supposed to prepare ourselves like a carbon. Just like a carbon, they would check it, make sure it's clear from any blemishes. So we're also doing slichas in a certain sense. We're like clearing ourselves from blemishes for at least 4 days before Rosh Hashanah. So just to give you a comparison over there. But anyway, it doesn't mention this in the in the Gemara. I'm just adding that about slichas. The Gemara here is talking about a carbon tamid, the daily offering. The daily offering was brought in a situation that the daily offering was brought in a way that they would always check it before. But what happens if you didn't check that carbon? So that is the case where they brought a sacrifice and it was not checked before. And to make it even worse, they brought the sacrifice on Shabbos. So not only did they bring a sacrifice that should not have been brought because it wasn't checked, but they even brought a sacrifice on Shabbos, where it's normally you're not allowed to slaughter an animal on Shabbos. And they slaughtered, the person slaughtered the animal for the carbon, for the daily sacrifice. And he brought it on Shabbos. He's going to be chayav v'chatos. Rabbi Yossi says he's obligated to bring a sin offering. He transgressed the Shabbos by slaughtering this animal that was not checked for a blemish for 4 days before. And the understanding is even if after the fact they check it later for a blemish and they don't see any blemishes, you are still transgressing the law, and it is not kosher. It was a wrong sacrifice, and you would be obligated here. It was a mistake, so you're obligated bringing a sin offering. And the question is why? Why can't you just check it afterwards? So one of the commentaries says that a lot of the blemishes you can't tell after the animal's dead. The blemishes would work if it was alive, but after it's dead, we can't check all the blemishes. Certain ones, you won't know. Certain blemishes you won't know about if the animal is already slaughtered. And this is according to Rabbi Yossi. The rabbis argue on this, but this is Rabbi Yossi. Now, the Gemara brings this brisa, and it says, "V'tzarech tamid acher," you even have to bring another sacrifice. This is so not kosher that it's not like a lot of things kosher after the fact. You did it already, it's accepted, so it's okay. No, you need to bring another sacrifice. So what comes out here is you made a mistake. You brought a sacrifice. You thought you were doing a mitzvah. You tried to bring a sacrifice, the daily sacrifice you were supposed to bring. You felt it was an obligation. You felt overwhelmed, and you made a mistake. You brought the wrong carbon. You brought an animal that was not checked for blemishes. And Rabbi Yossi says you're obligated. This proves wrong what we just concluded, that when you make a mistake, that you don't end up doing a mitzvah here. Like, for example, what ended up happening? You got to bring another sacrifice, another tamid. You didn't end up doing a mitzvah in the end. You don't end up doing a mitzvah in the end. Rabbi Yossi says, there, you got to bring a sacrifice, a sin offering. There, you should have brought the Me'ilah offering in the previous case, probably. Because here you see, Rabbi Yossi doesn't take it that far. When you end up doing a mitzvah, in the end, in the long run, you ended up doing a mitzvah. You carried your lulav to the rabbi's house to find out how to shake it on Shabbos. And so you ended up in the old days when you were supposed to shake lulav on Shabbos, and you carried it, but you're not supposed to carry your lulav there. You did. You carried it. So you sinned by mistake, but you ended up doing a mitzvah in the end. Rabbi Yossi says you're exempt from a sacrifice. But if you didn't do a mitzvah in the end because you ate a carbon that's an oila burnt offering, you didn't end up doing a mitzvah. Or, for example, you brought a sacrifice on Shabbos for a carbon tamid, which is supposed to be brought, but you brought the animal that's not a kosher animal. You brought an animal that wasn't checked for blemishes. In such a case, you are going to be obligated in bringing a sin offering. So the Gemara says, you know what? That's not a good kasha. Bar minadahi. Excluding that case, That case is not approved. The Hayitmar Allah, because it was stated about that. Amar Reb Shmuel Bar Chitoi. Reb Shmuel Bar Chitoi says, Amar Rab Amnuna Saba, in the name of Rab Amnuna the elder. Amar Rab Yitzchok Bar Ashia, in the name of Rab Yitzchok Bar Ashia. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rab, in the name of Rav Huna, in the name of Rav, that we're talking about Kegoin Shehiviyoi Milishka She'inon Mevukarin. This is not a regular case of mistake. This is a negligence. This is a case where you should have been able to make the right choice. This was not just you took an animal from the wrong stall, from the wrong pen. You took an animal from the animals that were not part of from an animal that wasn't supposed to be even used at all, because it was in the wrong area even. In the other cases, for example, even the case of the carbon, you ate the burnt offering. Where was that animal? It was right where the sin offerings are that are all eaten. So your burnt offering was right there. We call that a mistake. But if you go and take an animal, if you go and take a hamburger from a McDonald's, that's not a mistake. You thought it was kosher. Yeah, that's not a case of mistake. That's negligence. Here you took an animal that was from the wrong. It was from the wrong group of animals. That group of animals is the animals that are not checked yet. That's not a group you're supposed to be taking from. You took it from the totally wrong pen, and therefore we don't consider that a regular shoygeg. We call that a karoiv lamezid. We call that. This is much more. Rashi uses the word shekarev lamezid. This is more like done on purpose.
Gross negligence.
What's it called?
Closer to.
Gross negligence.
Gross negligence.
Right.
Or closer to being negligent.
Yes, closer to being negligent.
Well, no, he was definitely negligent.
Right.
If he's saying this is close to mazid, it has to be a level higher than negligence, which is gross negligence.
Thank you.
You weren't just mistaken. Nobody would do something like that. Right. That's gross negligence.
Gross negligence. So therefore, he is going to be responsible, even according to Rabbi Yossi, in that case, he's going to have to bring a karban chatos. And that brings us straight up to the Mishnah. I did want to touch on, and now that everyone is here, yesterday's discussion. So a few things. Regarding what we were talking about, Avelos, it seems that, well, this is the story. We mentioned that it seemed surprising that the Gemara mentioned Nichom Avelim when a person is going to hold his lulav when he goes throughout the day to all of his errands. He holds the lulav and esrog. The Anshe Yerushalayim used to do this. They would hold their esrog the whole day. This was on page 41b, and we mentioned about this special minhag. We mentioned about Ameimar would hold it during davening, but the Anshe Yerushalayim, they would hold it the whole day. They would go from their house, hold the lulav, the shul, and read Kriya Shema and daven with it, and then they would put it down for a short while to read the Torah and then do Berachos Kaina, but then they would carry it again and go to Bikur Cholim, Nichom Avelim, and they would hold their lulav in their hand throughout all of these things. When they went to the base medrash to learn, then they would send it home. Now, we mentioned, so what's this concept of Nichom Avelim on Yontiv? Normally people are not sitting Shiva, but you don't sit Shiva on Yom Tov. Even Cholamayed, you're not sitting Shiva, the person's not sitting Shiva. So either they finish Shiva before Yom Tov, or the Shiva is going to kick in after Yom Tov, at the end of Yom Tov, the last day of Yom Tov and onward. So why is there Nichom Avelim? So I mentioned to you the pshat that's brought from the Goinim. Where is it? It's the Shibbolei Haleket brings V'Shem HaGoinim. So this is the source of what I told you yesterday, that it's talking about, even though you don't have Avelos on a Yom Tov, nevertheless, people come and comfort the mourner and that's what it means nichum avelim, because it's not real nichum avelim. The problem we got into a little discussion was, well, they do nichum avelim. We do sort of say the typical words of nichum avelim on Shabbos in Ashkenazic shuls. So it seems like maybe there is nichum avelim, maybe on Yom Tov as well. And this was what we were trying to figure out, and if or something we were planning on looking into. So it seems that nichum avelim could be theoretically done on Shabbos and Yom Tov as well. It's it's not the minhag to do it, but not that it's not allowed to be done. Bekushi hitiru, there's a term in the Gemara that they permitted it, and so it seems that that's the minhag Ashkenaz is that it is done. It's even done like in public, sort of at the beginning of Shabbos or before Shabbos enters. It's a little interesting that there is such a minhag, but that's but it doesn't seem to be a problem because nichum avelim theoretically could be done on Shabbos. It's not. They speak against it, that a person shouldn't push off going during the week, because there's some people they push off going during the week and they just go on Shabbos.
I'm going to say good Shabbos to him anyway. Why isn't it just saying Hamakam Yinachem to an Avel that you see in shul a week after?
Right, but is that appropriate? That's what we were questioning. Is that appropriate on Shabbos?
Right.
Is that appropriate on Shabbos? So, first of all, one of the says the reason why we try not to do nichum avelim on Shabbos is that it causes the avel to remember, especially when you do the same term. If you say hamakam yanachem,
right,
you sort of bring up the weeping.
He relives, right?
You're gonna cause him to relive his sorrow, and so that would be the problem on Shabbos and Yom Tov, to actually say it. So if a person is visiting the Avel, generally we don't say the actual words of Nichum Avelim, you say other words. But again, it doesn't seem like this is it doesn't seem that the explanation that we saw that I quoted you from the Go'inim is not because halachically you can't do it. It's not, in other words, that's not why they're mentioned. That's not why they're saying that, because halacha, maybe you could do nichum avelim on Shabbos. It's because the minhag is not on Yom Tov. The minhag is not to. So what is it referring to? It's not a typical nichum avelim. It's more just comforting the avel. That's why they're translating it that way, not because halachically it can't be done. So it sort of like messes up the way we were our understanding yesterday, which we thought that maybe it wasn't allowed, but it's not so. Okay, so that is there is an interesting thing here, because the Rambam brings down, there's an interesting discussion here, because the Rambam does bring down that generally when you have two options, Nichum Avelim and Bikar Choylem, which one are you supposed to do first? So our Gemara uses the word Bikar Choylem and then Nichum Avelim. The surprising thing is, why does the Rambam say that you're supposed to do, the Rambam says you're supposed to do Nichum Avelim comes before Bikar Choylem? The commentaries mention that it seems surprising that it's in this order, and they say that since on a Yom Tov it's not regular Avelos, so he's not in so much pain. So therefore, Bikar Choylem actually comes first, than before Nichum Avelim. So in other words, the Brisa is not proof against the Rambam. Which one comes first? Because it's Yom Tov, it's an inyan of less pain. It's a time of Yom Tov. So therefore, it says Bikar Choylem. It mentions Bikar Choylem first. That's at least one of the understandings that they give. Our Sameach brings that explanation. And then the other thing is that it's not the minhag to do nichum avelim. So all you're doing really is comforting the person, but it's not the typical nichum avelim. That would be another, I guess that would be another explanation. Maybe that could be the reason why the goinim are saying that they're understanding it like the Rambam, that normally bika cholim should be after nicham avelim, but here, because nicham avelim is not the actual mitzvah, it's just comforting him. So bika cholim actually would come first. That would be another explanation to along the lines of what we said before. Now, the other discussion that we spoke about yesterday, I also looked into the Biur Halacha, which is the Mishnah Brura, comes up with this idea that I had touched on yesterday, and that is that Rabban Gamliel was not obligated to spend 1,000 zuz. Why not? Why was this called extra? Why was he not obligated to spend 1,000 zuz? The Gemara says we see his chavivos of the mitzvah. What do you mean, chavivos? He had to do a mitzvah. So we got into a discussion: how much of a person's wealth are they obligated to spend? You're not obligated to spend more than 1/5 of your entire wealth, which would basically mean 200,000. If a person has $1 million, they're not obligated to spend more than 1/5 of that, more than a chomesh of that, which would be like 200,000. You wouldn't have to spend more than 200,000 on an esrog. But the question is, would you really have to spend? Would you would you actually have to spend that amount up to 1/5, in order to fulfill a mitzvah? Now, the understanding is Rabban Gamliel spent more than that. When he spent 1,000 zuz, it was more than 1/5 even. So that's why the Gemara says about Rabbi Gamliel that what he did shows that the way he cherished the mitzvah. He gave even more than 1/5 of his wealth. I mean, that's a huge. But there's two things that are surprising about that. Number one, if he was that wealthy, and he was known to be wealthy, it does seem surprising that 1,000 zuz is more than 1/5 of his wealth. But that's the way this commentary is understanding it, that he gave more than 1/5, and that's why it's considered that he cherished the mitzvah. So that's one surprising thing, that I would think he was much more wealthy than that. And the other surprising thing is that because that he actually was allowed to give more than 1/5. Normally we say you're not allowed to give more than 1/5. And here he did give more than 1/5. And of course he was chaviv, he showed the mitzvah was cherishing, but are you allowed to? So on that, this commentary says that the Bach wants to say that he was allowed to. Why? Because normally we're afraid that if you give more than 1/5, everyone's going to need to start supporting you. And in this case, he was a leader anyway, and they anyway support him. And so it wasn't such a, it's not going to be an extra burden on the community if he spend this amount of money, because so he's allowed to spend more than 1/5. So that's the Bach's way of understanding it. Now, the Ran mentioned the Ran is in the back of the Gemara. The Ran says that Rabbi Gamliel was expected, because he was an usher, because he was wealthy, he was expected to spend, according to his wealth, spend a substantial amount of money on the on his esrog. Now, the understanding is he gave less than 1/5, but he spent a substantial amount of money. Now, the question is, so that's what the way the Ran understands it, that he wouldn't have been obligated maybe to do that, but he gave 1,000 zuz because it was less than a fifth, so he didn't transgress according to the Ran. He didn't transgress giving more than a fifth. He was a very wealthy person, and he did what what he should have, which is given according to his wealth. He bought a esrog, thousands of. The Mishnah Berurah asks. He says, so he spent 1,000 zuz. Why does that show that he had a chavivus of the mitzvah, that he cherished the mitzvah? He was wealthy. He spent 1,000 zuz. So on this, the Mishnah Berurah says, the way he understands the Ran is that he was getting ripped off. You have to give you should give according to your wealth, something that is the value. But if you're getting ripped off, you're not obligated to spend to buy it. You would be putter from shaking lulav. This is a very big chiddush, and it's brought by the Mishnah, by the Chofetz Chaim in his Biur Halacha sefer, not in the Mishnah Berurah. In the Biur Halacha on the side of the Mishnah Berurah, he says if you're getting ripped off for an esrog, what's not worth be'emes, and they were on a boat, they had no other way of getting an esrog for its worth. So in such a case, you were exempt from a lulav, from shaking lulav. He would have been exempt, and you're called an einus. And so this, that he went out of his way to spend money on getting ripped off on an esrog, that was considered to show that he cherished the mitzvah. But really in halacha, he would have been exempt because it wasn't the value, because they were charging him more than his value. That's the way the Biur Halacha seems to understand it. That because this was not its value, therefore it was considered a sign that he was extra cherishing of the mitzvah, and really he would have been. It really says two things. Number one, it says that a person who is getting ripped off and there's no other option, he is exempt from a positive mitzvah. That's number one. What this halacha is telling you, that if it's not the regular normal price, you would be exempt from fulfilling a mitzvah if they decide to
if something is not obtainable at a reasonable price, you're exempt.
Right. The question is, how do you judge what's reasonable? Because we know that the esrogim it's a very you
have to deal with a reasonable ganav.
It's a questionable business. I remember I once told the esrog, I once mentioned to an esrog guy after the esrog season was over, I said, "No, are you able to go on a little vacation now?" I meant it nicely. I meant to say a nice thing, like, can you relax? Because they work long hours. When they're selling the esrogim, they're working long hours. This guy got so insulted because he thought I was making fun of the fact that they rip everyone off. Did you go on a vacation now? Oh, now you rip everyone off. He thought I was insulting him. Really, I was just saying, I know you work really hard.
He thought you were talking about the price of your vacation.
The price, right? I was talking about.
You were talking about Mazel Tov. You have a little gesund and quiet
no, the
for
hours.
a while.
I was talking about the long hours you work.
Right.
He thought I was talking about the rip-off. But anyway, the point is that people that it's of course a delicate it's a questionable thing. How do you figure out what's the reasonable and what's not? But if everyone else is selling it at a certain price and you're stuck somewhere and they're charging you a crazy amount of money, then you would be actually exempt according to this. According to the way the Biur Halacha understands it, you would actually be exempt from fulfilling a positive mitzvah, from fulfilling such a mitzvah. This would apply. This would apply to other mitzvahs as well. It's lulav and other positive mitzvahs. Now, Rav Gamliel was machmer on himself, and he bought it anyway, even though he got ripped off. Now, we're going to continue over here with the Mishnah. Let's continue. So the Mishnah says, "Mekabelas isha." A woman receives the lulav, miyad bana, miyad baila. So we're back on page 42a. We're back at the Mishnah. We're going to continue. A woman takes the lulav from the hand of her son and from the hand of her husband, and it's not a problem. Not a problem of muktzah. Well, we'll soon see in the Gemara why the Gemara thinks, why the Mishnah thinks it has to tell us this. But she can take that and she's allowed to return it into water on Shabbos. Now, you're not allowed to grow things, but she's allowed to return it to water on Shabbos. And the reason is because it's only to keep its moistness, not for it to grow. Now, Rashi mentions over here that it's only the water that it was taken from. You can't add water to the water that it was originally there. And for sure, you're not allowed to switch the water that it was in originally and pour it out and put new water in, because that would be considered fixing, and you can't do that. Or it's adding moistness, according to another reason, adding moistness to what initially wasn't there if you're adding water. So these are the reasons why it's permissible to use the actual, return it to the actual water, but not to add any extra water or to switch it with other water.
Right.
What did you say? Rabbi Yehuda says, B'Shabbos machzirin. On Shabbos, you're allowed to return it to the water that it was in, where you took it from, on Shabbos. B'Yom Tov ma'asifin, on Yom Tov, you're allowed to add water to the original water that was there, but you're not allowed to switch it. Uva moyed, and on choil hamoyed, and on the intermediate days, machlifen. You could actually switch. Well, not that surprising, but you could switch the water to new water, and that's what we do. And it's a mitzvah to switch it. And Rashi over here says that mitzvah lahachlif. But moyed, we switch it. Rashi adds in the word mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to switch it. Okay. Katan hayodeh lenane. Katan, a child that knows how to wave this way, forward, backward, up and down. Chayev belulav, he is obligated in the mitzvah of lulav. And what does this mean? The father is obligated to be mechanechem with the mitzvah of lulav. Now the Gemara says, Pshita, isn't it obvious that the woman can take the lulav from her husband, from her son, and why would she not be allowed to? The Gemara says, Mahu detema, you might have thought to say, you might have said, a woman is not obligated in the mitzvah of lulav. At least in the olden days, a woman was not obligated. In today's day and age, some say that women have accepted on themselves to shake the lulav. It's interesting, but the Gemara has a thought that women might not even be allowed to hold it because they're not bar chiyuva, they're not obligated. It's a mitzvah saseh shazman grama. It's a mitzvah, a positive mitzvah that's dependent on time. So a woman was really, according to the letter of the law, they're exempt. So ema loisa kabel, I would say that she should not receive it from her son or from her husband because it's muktzah for her. Kamash Balan, it comes and lets us hear that it's considered a vessel, it's not considered muktzah, and therefore it would be permissible. Since it's fit for men, it's called a kli, it's called a vessel, and anyone can carry it. That's the first little piece of Gemara. Katan hayodeh lenane, a child that knows how to wave the lulav. Tano Rabbanan, rabbis taught in a brisa. Katan hayedela naneh, a child that knows how to wave the lulav, chayev b'lulav. He would be obligated in lulav, and as we said, it would mean the father would be obligated basically to buy him a lulav or arrange for him to have a lulav, chayev b'lulav. Lehesate, if he knows how to put on tzitzis, chayev tzitzis, lishmar tefillin, to guard himself, to guard the tefillin, he would be obligated in his father aviv lakeh lishmar tefillin, aviv lakeh like tefillin. His father would have to buy him tefillin. Rashi says, what does it mean? He knows how to watch the tefillin. It means that he doesn't go into a beis hakisei, into a bathroom with the tefillin. So the father, the father would buy him tefillin. The Gemara says, the Brisa continues, says, Yodea Ladaber, if he knows how to speak, Aviv Laimdai Torah Ukriyashma. The father teaches him Torah and Kriyashma if he knows, once he knows how to speak. Torah Maihi, what does it mean? Father teaches him Torah once he knows how to speak. Amar Rav Hamnuna, Torah Tzivalana Moshe, Rasha kills Yaakov. So Rav Hamnuna says, you know what it means? Did you teach him Torah? Teach him the pasuk Torah Tzivalana Moshe. And what does it mean? Kriya Shema. Kriya Shema Maihi means the whole Shema. No. Pasuk Rishon, the first pasuk. That's what you got to teach your son. Teach him Torah Tziva and teach him Shema Yisrael. That's the first two things you should teach a child when they learn how to speak. Hayodea Lishmar Gufay. If a child knows how to guard his body from tumah, of not touching a dead body, and other tumahs, an oyel, so on. So if he knows how to guard his body, tumas maga masa and oyel, Rashi says, from touching, from carrying, and from being in the same tent as, or being a tent over. So if he knows how to guard himself, you're allowed to rely on him and eat holy things that his body touched. We're not afraid that he was tameh, because he knows how to guard himself. And we're not talking about if he touched something with his fingers, because his hands, because hands is a separate thing. That's what it says right after. Then it says lishmaris yadav, if he knows how to guard his hands from tumah, and once he washes his hands, he's careful not to touch anything that's a suffix tameh, that possibly is impure, and if he ever is about to touch taharos and he's not sure about his hands, he makes sure to wash them. So oichlen al yadav taharos, we're allowed to eat even if holy things touched his hands. If a child knows, when you ask him about if he touched something, and if it's tameh, if he touched tumah or not, and he knows how to answer, so he's yodeya lishol, he knows how to be asked. And he knows the three answers: yes, no, or I'm not sure, or I don't know. Those three, he knows how to say. He knows how to reply. So he knows yodeya lishael. He knows how to be asked, which means he knows how to respond. So bershus hayachid. So in a case where it's not, where we're not sure about the tumah, for example, he says he doesn't know. So if it's in a private domain, sfeikoi tameh, the question we always assume act in a strict way, and we say it's tameh. Bershus harabim, if it's in a public domain, sfeikoi tahar, we take doubts to the side that it's pure. We assume that it's pure. A doubt is assumed to be pure. Why is that? That in Rishus HaYachid, the private domain, we are machmir. We always say it's impure. And in a public domain, we consider it pure. The answer is because it has something to do with soita. And by soita, the law is that a woman who we're not sure if she is tameh or tahor, we're not sure if she had relations with someone or not. There's reason to assume that she might have had relations with someone. What is the halacha? She's impure to her husband. Where does that take place? Not in public domain. She's not doing something in a public domain with this other man. It would be in a private domain. So we basically learn that's the common thing throughout Shas, throughout the Talmud. You see this question. If it's a Rishus HaYachid or Rishus HaRabbim, if it's in a private domain, we always say it's Tameh. And in a public domain, we say things are Tahor. It's based on a woman who's transgressed. That when when we're not sure if she transgressed, we by Saita we learn that Rishus HaYachid is always Tameh. That when it's a private domain, similar to a Saita, similar to like a woman who might have transgressed, we say that she's impure to her husband until she drinks the Saita water. So the same thing would apply to any type of Tumah impurity. We assume is Tameh if it's in a private domain. If it's in a public domain, Sveikoi Tahor, it's considered pure. And we're going to stop here. Let's finish the page. If he knows how to do Berchas Kayanim, to spread out his palms in public, so Cholkin like Truma Bebeis Hagronis, we can divide, we can give him a portion, we distribute to him the Truma in where they gather the fruits, in the Beis Hagronis, in the place where they gather the fruits, because we know that he must be, if he's actually doing the Berchas Kayanim, he must be an adult, and because a child is not supposed to do Berchas Kayanim. If he does that, then he must be eligible to take Truma in the Beis Hagronis. He can divide him the Truma where it's where they would gather these fruits. Okay, we finished the page. I'm going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Rabbi, thank you.